Magic the Gathering is my favorite game of all time. Or I should say, was my favorite game of all time. Not that the game isn't good anymore, but it must be acknowledged that Magic has changed a lot throughout its lifetime, more so recently than ever before. Although it can still be recognized mechanically, it's undeniable that the era of fire design and introduction of universes beyond Magic. Seriously, we've visited the mystical plane of New York City in 3 separate sets since 2025, and Alara essentially once since 2008. Has transformed the niche fantasy game into a Fortnite-esque multiversal crossover that constantly pushes its own complexity level to the brink. I'd like to stress, there's nothing wrong with this per se, but I fell out of love with new Magic a few years ago. It doesn't stop the itch, though. In searching for a way to share my love for this game with people close to me, I ran into a problem. I struggled to find a way to introduce a player to the game. Back in the day, I would just teach someone the rules using a couple decks I whipped up from my collection, and then they would go out and buy their own cards to play with me, maybe picking up a dual deck or a fat pack. God, remember fat packs? But I don't feel comfortable with that so much anymore. My collection is large enough to make fun decks, but I don't have any cards from recent standard sets to constrain myself to. I also feel uncomfortable telling people they need to buy things to play with me, and even if they did, the Magic they would learn would differ greatly from the Magic I remember. I have a few Commander decks, but good luck teaching a new player with the format designed for judges, containing every card in Magic's history. I found my solution in Cube. I've created a few cubes before. My first was just 360 cards for my collection when I was 15, and it felt like it. I built a powered vintage cube in high school with my friends by borrowing the collection of a teacher who had been playing and collecting since the beginning. After taking a long break from Cube, I built another powerful cube using a Magic proxy service to be able to afford it for a fraction of its cost. I ran into power and complexity issues quickly. Every new set had new cards that could go into the cube, and the process of evaluation and rebalancing was very difficult from a managerial perspective, and nightmarish to try to teach to a new player. The release of Magic Foundations created a flash of inspiration for me. I've always admired core sets. They strip away the fancy design innovations of set-unique mechanics and bring Magic back to its basics: wizards, summoning creatures, and slinging spells. They're great for new players, featuring reminder text across cards for mechanics that are long embedded into the game. I would design my own cube with these design goals. The cube must be beginner-friendly, featuring reminder text, simple mechanics, and classic strategies. The cube would capture the way I remember Magic as it captured me as a teenager. Classic fantasy of angels and demons, dragons and knights, goblins, elves, elementals, and great sea monsters clashing in epic duels between multiverse-walking mages. I wanted to include some of the most powerful cards from Magic's history without breaking their balance. Tinker, for example, is broken when you can use it on turn 1 to pull a powerful stacks card from your deck, but not so much when you use it on turn 3 to pull an artifact creature. Gaia's Cradle is pretty busted in elf ball strategies, but fair enough in mid-range strategy. Kiki Jiki is a combo piece, but it can also be very fun when used as intended. The cube would be Magic the Gathering as Richard Garfield intended. Creatures in the first few Magic sets were pathetically weak by design, and spells were pushed. When designing the game, perhaps Garfield thought that if winning required creatures, keeping them small would create tense board states a la chess, where the legions of small creatures could face each other and the players would have to make impactful decisions on a turn-to-turn basis to eke out a win. To facilitate this balance goal, I created a baseline. Cards I wanted to include no matter what, to serve as a logical basis for evaluation. For spells, I picked Swords to Plowshares, Day of Judgment, Counterspell, Doomblade, Demonic Tutor, Lightning Bolt, Pyroclasm, and Giant Growth. These are among the simplest and most powerful effects in Magic, and they would anchor the cube's power level for spells. For creatures, I aimed lower. My number 1 baseline creature was Serra Angel. As a 5-mana 4/4 with flying and vigilance, Serra Angel qualified as a bomb in 1993. Nowadays, WotC is in the habit of printing strictly better upgrades to Serra Angel fairly regularly. Other creatures I picked up for their iconography across the colors include Snapcaster Mage, Rhymekin Recluse, Vampire Nighthawk, Beetleback Chief, Predator Dragon, Llanowar Elves, Colossal Dreadmaw, Bloodbraid Elf, Shadowmage Infiltrator, and Iridescent Angel. Then I had another revelation. One aspect of Richard Garfield's magic that has gone by the wayside slightly is the classic wall creature. This plays into that chess-like mentality of the original Magic, where players would create defensive bulwarks for their opponents to overcome. Of course, this fell out of fashion, partially because players didn't like spending resources on cards that would fluctuate between stationary and useless, as any creature with a high enough power completely invalidates a wall. There are a few walls that have seen play over the years, however, mostly for their ability to draw cards or make mana. I noticed a common theme among these playable walls. Many of them have around 4 toughness. 4 is a very important breakpoint in Magic, seeing as players begin the game with 20 life, a creature with 3 power would take 7 consecutive unblocked attacks to win. A creature with 4 power takes only 5. So that became the secret 5th design pillar of the cube. Creatures would be balanced around the number 4. A creature with 4 or more power would be powerful, and most creatures would be kept below that auspicious number unless it was meant to stand out as a game-winning threat, both to keep the game in line with an older style of play, and also to enable the addition of several wall creatures that may otherwise be unplayable. With those design pillars in mind, I began the work. I scoured Scryfall for every card that ever meant something to me, and began bathing in nostalgia. I started playing Magic just after 10th edition. I remember the first time I played with my older brother, who taught me just to have someone to practice with so he could play with his friends. My dad gave us a large collection his friend donated to us, and I would spend hours going through the old cards. The first set I ever opened myself was Shards of Alara, and that plane left an indelible mark on my psyche. I revisited Magic many times throughout my life, and I would say I was fully exposed to Magic and its culture all the way up from 10th edition to around War of the Spark. I've been in and out since, and there are many sets I've completely skipped out on. After putting every card I wanted to include in one list, I was faced with problems. I needed to cut so many, and my pillars were crashing into one another. There were several cards I wanted to include for their prominence in my nostalgia that were simply balanced wrong for the cube. Or cards with art I loved that were too mechanically complex. Or similarly, cards that were mechanically perfect, with little things I personally disliked about them. It was soon after I found myself in this predicament that I had my final and truest revelation. Or perhaps this is when the madness truly took hold. What if I took the cards I wanted to include and just changed them? How could I possibly justify including Runeclaw Bear in a cube where people would rather play any other 2-mana spell? Well, what if it was a 3/3? Don't you dare say this isn't balanced. Look at these cards. The art of Scornful Aetherlich is inscribed deep in my mind. But I don't think anyone is scrambling to play it in cube, including me. What if I just tooled with it a little? Bountiful Harvest and Angel's Mercy used to feel powerful to me, but I've since learned they're traps for newer players. What if they weren't? Steppe Lynx is one of my favorite cards ever, but it's pretty lackluster, even with dedicated landfall synergies, mostly due to its irrelevance in the late game. What if it had a secondary function? And while we're at it, let's alter its mirror, the elemental Akum Hellhound. Can I justify including Baneslayer Angel, even though it's so much better than my baseline Serra Angel? I don't think so, but what if I changed it slightly, to land closer to the power level of the cube? Perfect. And Earthshaker Giant is literally a better Dreadmaw. Unacceptable. Sun Titan is too good. Hero's Downfall is too ugly. There's no reminder text on this card. I need more Knights and Elementals. There's not enough Seb McKinnon representation in the cube. Things quickly spiraled out of hand from here. I had opened a can of worms and I couldn't stop until I had the perfect cube. As part of the original draft of this cube, I included the Urza Saga Legendary Lands, Gaia's Cradle, Tolarian Academy, and Serra Sanctum. Out of these, the weakest in my draft was Serra Sanctum. Despite my best efforts, including an enchantment sub-theme in white was difficult. Even in constructed formats, this white power land is an oddity, only played in pillow fort strategies I didn't really want to facilitate in my cube. But to include only 2 members of a 5-color cycle felt antithetical to my goals, so I sought to empower these lands, beginning with Serra Sanctum and the enchantment theme. A card I remember from my first ever Magic experience was Angelic Wall. When my brother played it against me at 8 years old, it felt impenetrable. I don't see how that could be possible now, but I wanted to preserve that feeling of an immovable object when I included it in my cube. I started by adding the text of Wall of Essence. Then I added the enchantment and angel types, subtly nerfing it and providing additional synergy for the enchantment-starved color. I also altered several more cards to be enchantments, to counterbalance the abundance of artifacts in my cube. But what of the rest of that 5-color legendary land cycle? Why not include Phyrexian Tower and Shivan Gorge? Well, to me, they read as too mechanically different from the other members of the cycle. So what if I made my take on the rest of the cycle? I love these cards from Alara block, but they are functionally useless in cube. What if they weren't, and instead became part of a 5-color cycle of 3 mana tutors that cost additional resources? What if I made functionally unique cards to support and demonstrate cube synergies? My descent into insanity was jubilant and productive. In the end, I modified, either minorly or majorly, 170 cards out of this 470 card cube. Roughly 36% of the cards in my cube are not a part of Magic the Gathering, and yet I feel they all fit perfectly, and I'm willing to bet that most are completely invisible to the average player. For example, what's changed about this card? That's right, it's a knight. It also no longer has Metalcraft, cutting down on the number of named mechanics in the cube. What about this card? Now you might play it in a deck. And this one? In this cube, some cards have been made wizards for synergistic reasons. Clinquaint Skymage, Oromancer, Dread Rider, Deadly Recluse, Greatsword, If it isn't clear, I went a little overboard on this. Meticulous consideration was taken for each and every card, and I'm confident in saying this is my favorite way of playing Magic. And it provides a convenient basis to teach new players. I wrote a 35-page new player's guide and rulebook to accompany the cube, and I plan on getting it physically printed to be kept with the cube as a standalone board game, such that any 2 people could sit down, read the guide, and begin playing Magic. Ideally, a more experienced player could peruse the cube for the simplest cards and create decks just for learning purposes, just to skip the deck building phase while learning the rules. But I believe that even 2 total newcomers could create decks just using tips from the guide. The experience of attempting to encapsulate a balanced version of Magic as I remember it in 470 cards was very cathartic. I'd recommend others to try and do the same with the aspects of Magic they find most important. Mine is oriented to new players and specific aesthetics that matter to me, but chasing design goals and stretching the limits was very creatively satisfying. If you'd like to get a feel for the cube, check out the CubeCobra link down below and try a sample draft. Whether you're new to Magic or a seasoned player, I'd love to hear your feedback. In addition, I've included the link to my Magic rulebook and tip guide, which should even have value for anyone interested in learning to play, regardless of your interest in my cube. If you're interested in playing this cube yourself, your only options are to play it digitally using a service like Tabletop Simulator, or to proxy it, as many of the cards have been altered in unique ways. The estimated cost at time of recording is $375 for the cards and $100 for the sleeves, so around $500 for infinitely remixable classic Magic fun. I wouldn't push anyone to buy it, but I do think everyone should attempt a project like this if they're a Magic fan. Now I have a prepackaged version of the game that I'll play for many years to come, and I'll never need to buy a Magic product again. Because I have my Magic.